This video is sponsored by DOFUS's developer, Onkama. I talk a lot about tactics RPGs on this channel, and usually that means single-player games. But I'm also a big fan of MMORPGs, so sometimes I want to play a game that merges the two. And recently I've been playing DOFUS Touch, and it's a great game to try if you're in the same boat as me where you're interested in a multiplayer MMO-style tactics RPG. If you haven't heard of DOFUS Touch, that might be because of where you live. It's a mobile MMO that's pretty big in Europe and Latin America, but if you're in North America, now is a great time to learn about it, because new servers, including a dedicated English server, are launching today with an updated new player experience. So it's a great time to jump in. I've been playing the game for the last month, and I'm going to talk a bit about my experience with the game and why I think you'll like it too. DOFUS Touch is a tactics RPG where you adventure through a high fantasy universe called the World of 12, playing as one of 15 classes. And the classes here are actually one of the first things that jumped out at me when I started playing the game, as there's a ton of unique options here. Rather than picking from the usual assortment of RPG classes, we have some pretty unique ones like the turret-wielding Foggernauts or the time-manipulating Zelors. After much deliberation, I ultimately settled on SRAM's Shadow for my class for two reasons. First, because it let me play as a skeleton, which is awesome, and second, because the class focuses on laying traps and manipulating enemies on the battlefield to knock them into the traps, which is something I thought I would really enjoy. Between the 15 classes, you will definitely be able to find a class that speaks to you both aesthetically and mechanically, and a neat thing about the game is that you have an opportunity to try all the classes that you want before locking into one long term. You get to customize your character a bit when you make them, but don't worry if you're wanting more options, as you'll get more gear and cosmetics as you progress in the game. Character creation here is also our first chance to really get a good look at the game's art style, which takes inspiration from anime as well as Western cartoons. I really love the bright color palette and the distinct outfits for each class. I don't play too many games where I can be a skeleton rogue, so that was pretty exciting for me. But let's get into the gameplay, as that's the main thing your class impacts, and you get dropped right into it after character creation. Battles take place in grid-based fashion, and you have a number of spaces you can move, as well as a number of points you can spend on spells each turn. Every class starts with a handful of spells, and you unlock more as you level up. SRAMs, like myself, get a lot of spells that make enemies move, as well as AoE traps that you can lure or push enemies into. For me, I was able to cast a couple spells per turn, which usually looked like laying a trap and then using a spell to push an enemy into it. Though my strategy could change depending on the enemy and how everyone was positioned. I would also spend some turns casting my long-range wind magic or applying a damage over time poison effect. Figuring out the best way to combine your skills and when each skill is best used is one of the most fun parts of the game to me. Anytime there was just a single enemy, it was usually my best bet to use my strongest single target fire spell, Tricky Blow, twice. But if there were multiple enemies, it was usually best to try to place a trap and push an enemy into it, such that the explosion would hit multiple targets. Alternatively, if an enemy was near a wall, even if there were multiple enemies, it was often still best to use Tricky Blow, as it does more damage when an enemy is in a state where they can't be pushed, like when they're up against an object. If I was far away from the enemies, the best move was to set up multiple traps in preparation for a big boost of damage next turn. Eventually, you start to get into a routine where you figure out what the best moves are and when you need to use them, but even that gets shaken up as you unlock new spells as you level up. When I unlocked invisibility, I really liked starting off trickier fights by turning invisible and setting up a bunch of traps so that I could take out an enemy or two as soon as I revealed myself. I also spent some time playing the Foggernaut class, which was all about turrets, and for them, placing the turrets where they are in range of enemies and keeping enemies in that range was the most interesting part. I'm sure all of the classes have their own unique quirks that make playing them in battle engaging, and that's something I really liked about the game. Battles become really interesting though when you introduce multiple characters. Adding a second character on my side of the battle meant I needed to think about what they were going to do when I positioned my traps and think about where they were going to move. Boss encounters also add more complex enemy attacks that are interesting to maneuver around. At first, you'll mostly be fighting on your own or with NPCs, but you'll also be able to take on encounters with other players, which is great fun as you figure out how best to work together and combine your skill sets. Even two players in the same class can play pretty differently depending on what spells they upgraded and how they built their character. A cool thing that DOFUS Touch does to keep you from falling into too much of a routine and spice combat encounters up a bit is that it adds a bonus challenge to each fight. In each fight, you'll have a little box on the left side of your screen that gives you some challenge for each fight. These challenges can include things like using all of your movement every turn, killing enemies in a certain order, or avoiding taking damage before you defeat an opponent. You don't have to complete these challenges, but if you do, you are rewarded with additional experience and loot. This makes leveling up a little quicker and keeps fights more engaging even against lower level enemies, as you have to keep the challenge in mind and adjust your strategy accordingly. Also keeping encounters fresh is the variety of monsters you can fight. I've fought everything from bears to weasels to powerful sorcerers, spear-wielding soldiers, bipedal sewer rat mages, a dragon, and intelligent fuzzballs. And there's still lots of game left for me to play, so I'm excited to see what monsters are left in the game's library. And you're going to want to fight as many enemies and complete as many challenges as you can, because that's how you get experience, and getting experience is how you level up, which is how you improve your spells and stats and get new abilities to play with. In the early game, you get new abilities every few levels, but you also get points to spend each level to upgrade your spells and stats. Each stat besides Vitality, which determines your health, is associated with an element, such as Earth or Fire, and each spell is also associated with one of those elements. So there's a fair amount of customizability here depending on what spells you like the most. I really focused on upgrading my Fire stat because it applied to my two favorite spells, an explosive trap and a fire blast that pushes enemies away. But I also could have focused on improving my air spells, as that would have applied to my long range spells and my damage over time spell. You can see me here putting points into vitality and intelligence when I leveled up, but really I would recommend focusing on one element early that applies to the spells you like to use the most, because that will make them as effective as they can be. So there's tons of customization here, more than I've come to expect from many other MMOs where you often don't make a decision on what stats to raise or what spells to improve. The battles and combat mechanics are only half the gameplay though. DOFUS Touch also has a massive world for you to explore. There are over 10,000 maps to adventure through where you'll find quest givers, merchants, monsters to slay, and NPCs to chat with. One of the things I was most impressed with was the sheer scope of the game. It's easily the largest mobile MMO I've ever played, and I feel like I could play for months more and still be finding new maps to check out and explore. And even better is that exploring the maps is pretty fun. There are a ton of different environments and cities to check out, each with their own set of issues for you to help with. In the early town of Astrub, I learned about a conflict between the local militia group and a resistance group, neither of which seemed to have the well-being of the townsfolk in mind. In the same town, I helped find a lost book, fought intelligent rats in the sewers, learned the story of a local legendary knight, hunted a couple bounties, and protected a caravan as it made its way through town. There was so much to do in just this town, which was one of the first locations that I got to. This was also where the story kicked off in earnest, and a neat thing about the story is that it's actually set in the same universe as the developer's other game, Wakfu, which also has a Netflix animated series. DOFUS takes place 1,000 years before the events of Wakfu. I actually played a bit of Wakfu while I was in college, so it was pretty cool getting to see what the world was like way back in the past. And the writing in this game is pretty charming. Something that struck me about the game was how often it made me laugh. One of my favorite NPCs that I met early in the game is this woodcutter that's just perpetually chopping at the stump of this tree. You know, normal MMO stuff. But if you ask them about it, they explain that they're intentionally not cutting it down because they get paid by the hour instead of by the tree. The game is full of quirky moments like that, which are a lot of fun for me. The lore of the world is also a standout. When I had an opportunity to learn a bit about my class, Sram's Shadow, and the god Sram that they're named for, there was a lot of interesting lore and detail there. I found out that Sram is a calculating, manipulative god who has cultivated the image that he's a harmless idiot so that others lower their guard around him. The same journal that revealed this also included examples of common expressions and behaviors used by Sram's followers, my favorite of which was that when Srams fall in love, one partner will offer the other one a bone as a sign of affection. I thought this was equal parts charming and cute for a group of rogues heavily populated by intelligent skeletons. I assume similar lore exists for all of the classes, and each quest that I did in the game contributed to the background and character of the area I was adventuring in. So if you're into lore, there's a lot of that to enjoy in DOFUS Touch. Overall, after playing DOFUS Touch for about a month, I had a blast with the combat, which I anticipated since I love tactics RPGs, but I also really enjoyed the adventuring and quest writing. One of the best parts about the game to me, though, is how fully featured it feels. Often when I play a mobile MMO, I bounce off of it for one of two reasons. Either they don't feel as complete as a PC MMO, or they are riddled with microtransactions that you need just to access the core features of the game, like having to pay for new zones or loot boxes. But DOFUS Touch wasn't like that at all. The game is huge, its scope rivaling any other MMO I've played, and there was never any content that was gated behind a microtransaction. The game also takes advantage of the mobile form factor well. You can easily travel from map to map by swiping or tapping, and everything from combat to menuing to traversal feels intuitive. So whether you're into tactics gameplay, MMOs, mobile gaming, or all three, DOFUS Touch is definitely worth a look. And there's never really been a better time to try it than now with the new servers launching today. If you want to check it out, you'll find a link in the video description where you can download the game. And if you're trying out the new English servers, you'll also get this shield skin to wear during your adventure. It's only available until April 10th though, so don't wait too long to check it out. As always, a big thank you to my geckos on Patreon, and a shout out to my skinks, Red Mage Morgan, Chicken, Morg Wolf, Upscale Furry Trash, Cosplay Sylveon, Emma, Van West, Aikipu, Lucy Sev, Romeo, Wingman, Lonely Voxel, Aaron Gedden, Micabre, Stars to Art, Doopy, and the Noodle Doodler. I really appreciate all your support. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, and I hope you have yourself a lovely week.